let's just look at one more string. Let's look at the G string. Now I actually use the G string as my main playing string, especially on the electric guitar. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, when you're playing the sitar, your main playing string is actually tuned in the same way as the G string. Your bass string on the sitar, so your first bass string gives you the Sa, and then the main playing string is tuned to a Ma. So a lot of sitar players tune to D, so we're basically just, we've got the same layout with these two strings as you would on the sitar. So that means that most sitar material, at least the material that uses, on the main string, you can just transfer that directly to the guitar, so the frets all basically work in the same way. So that's one thing that just really helps with transferring sitar material and having a direct translation point to the guitar neck. The other thing is that the tone of the G string, I really like the slightly deeper, mellower tone that you have on the G string compared to the higher strings. And you can do a different kind of bending that you can't do on the higher strings, because you've got more range of fret below the string. It means that you can bend downwards. And that's how you bend on the sitar, and it's much more appropriate, I feel. You can get the nuances of the mean, the Indian style of bending. You can get the feel of it more through that technique, I find. It's just something about the physicality of it, the way that your finger sits on top of the string. It just feels to me that you can get much more control, and you get a different feel when you're bending upwards to when you're bending downwards, in my experience. So that's great for the electric guitar, but with the acoustic guitar, the cutaway doesn't give you as much access, or maybe there's no cutaway. And if it's an acoustic guitar that has a wound third string, which is the standard kind of layout, then any sort of sliding doesn't have as smooth a sound, because you hear this kind of scratching sound of the string as you go over the windings of the metal string. You can hear that sound, so it doesn't really work so well to use that as your main string on the acoustic. So on the acoustic, you're kind of better off with the top two strings as your main strings. So let's look at how we would use this for Raag Yaman. So the open string, as we said, is a Ma, and we don't use the Shuddha Ma, the natural Ma. We use the Ma tiva. So we have to use the first fret and not the open string. So it means that you can't do pull-offs that have the open string. You can't do that sort of thing quite so freely. You have to avoid doing that. So that's one thing to consider. So going on from there, Ma tiva is a nice note to have as your first fret, because you can go down to that note and then you can ascend up from that note as well. So it's a good pivotal note to have. You can do a really nice little bend if you've got some strength on fret 1. It's not the easiest bend, because it's hard to judge the distance, and there's a lot of tension on the string there, but it has quite a rich texture to it if you can experiment with that. So you're getting it right under your finger and just slowly pulling it up. And you play the drone, so you can hear if you've got it in tune. So let's have a look at exploring the structure of the scale from that string. So first fret, there's the Ma, then we would have a Da at the 4th fret, and then there's our Mi at fret 6, and we've got the skipping Sa, we've got the Re at fret 12, and then the Ga at fret 13. So let's just pause there for a moment. So we had Ma, Da, Mi, Re and Ga on frets 1, 4, 6, 9 and 11. So pay attention to the pattern as it moves across the dots. So the first note is fret 1, so there's no dot there. And then we're skipping the first dot, so we're landing in between these two dots. Then you land in between the next two dots as well, and then if you were playing sa here, you'd land on the third dot. So that would be skipping the dot, skipping the next dot, and then landing on 7 to play a sa. But as we're doing the full ascending order, we would come, so ma, da, ni, and then re on the fourth dot. Okay? So then we have ga, which is on the 11th fret, so that's just before the 12th. So visually, it depends how it works for you, but you know, I use the fretboard as a kind of visual map. I don't think about numbers that much. I think a bit more visually and just hearing wise. I just try to orientate just the sound of the scale. So now we can do that in the second octave of the string, and the dots are going to help us just to learn that quicker. So now we've got ma tiva on the first fret, so that's the 13th fret if you're up here. So the first fret is equivalent to the 13th, and then we have the da, so that's skipping over the dot, skipping over pa, and then we have a ni, which is again in between the dots, and then we have sa landing on that third dot. Okay, so the dots 1, 2, 3 are the same as these, 1, 2, 3. So we've got ma, da, ni, sa. So if we were playing the whole length of the string up to there, we would have ma, da, ni, re, ga, ma, da, ni, sa. So that's it's a bit more than one octave. Let's try doing it as a standard octave like we did on the other strings. So to do that, we'll start with ni. So that's a ni at fret 6. Then we have the re, and then a ga, ma, da, ni, sa. So we go all the way up to sa, and now we'll come down from there. So sa, ni, da, pa, and the ma, ga, re, sa. So on the way down there, that's the 19th fret, back to 18 and 16, and then we'll play 14 to play pa. So sa, ni, da, pa, and then we have the ma at fret 13, ga at fret 11, and then the re at fret 9, and sa at fret 7. So we're adding in the pa at fret 14 and the sa at fret 7. And if we were going down from there, we've got the ni, the da, and a pa at fret 2. So just like we added in a pa here on 14, you see that's just before the first dot. We also add it in at fret 2 just before the first dot. So you've got your pas here and here, and your sas here and here. So getting to know exactly where the pas and the sas are, that always maps out the whole thing quite vividly, because then you can judge easily where the other notes are in between those two. Now, just in case you're wondering about the D string, let's just look at a few notes that we could use on the D string that we can't find on the other strings. So, for example, if you were playing ni da on the 6th and 4th fret of the G string, then you could play that ma note, the tiva ma, you could play that at fret 6 of the D string. So 6, 4 on the G, and a 6 and a 4 on the D as well, so that gives you a ma, ga on the D string. And then there's a re at fret 2, and what I would do is just come back up from there. So once you get down to that re, then go back up to your ga, ma, and then you switch to the G string to play the da at fret 4. So that's 2, 4, 6, and then switch to fret 4 of the G string. Now the reason for that is that if you play a sa, then you have to go down to a ni in order to ascend up the scale again. So sa being the open string, you can't go any lower than that unless you've got the A string on your guitar. If you've got the A string, then you can play a fret 4 on the A string, that'll give you a knee, and then you can use that to, to do a different kind of transition. But as I'm just using the top 4 strings, I just have to be a bit more aware of that, so I'll come back to my Re and then go back up. If you did play the open string, then you would just sort of pause for a moment, and then you could just start somewhere else in the scale. So you can end that phrase with Sa and then just take a breath and then begin a new phrase. But you wouldn't really go sort of Ga, Re, Sa, Re, Ga, because that's not part of the language of Raag Yaman. Okay, so that's exploring a fair bit of the neck, and we're doing it so far just in a linear way, just moving up and down the strings. But this is a great way to play because it helps you to phrase in a way that is more akin to the sitar or the sarod, where they move up and down one string at a time. So I'll see you in the next chapter, where we're going to look at some key phrases that make up the language of Raag Yaman.